Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar about the FLA's new Wage Data Collection Toolkit. I'm Renee Bowers. I'm the Director of Accountability here at FLA, and I am joined by Jose Perales, who's our Data and Technology Analyst, and Cassie Wright, who manages all of our training programs here at FLA. We're all excited to be here. I am going to give you all a quick welcome and introduction, and then I'm going to pass it over to Jose. Our goal today is to walk you through FLA's new Wage Data Collection Toolkit, as well as our Wage Ladder Generator, so that you all feel very confident in using the Wage Data Collection Toolkit to gather wage information from your suppliers and production facilities. So Jose will walk you through the toolkit, and then we will have time for questions and answers so that you can get all of your burning questions out on the table, which I think will be useful for all of us. So just to start out by way of introduction, as you all know, we at the Fair Labor Association and you all as our affiliates have made a very strong commitment to implementing fair compensation in supply chains, and as we all know, that is not an easy task. So our goal at FLA is to really help give affiliates and other stakeholders the tools that you need to chart a path towards meeting that commitment to fair compensation. And data gathering wage data is, of course, just one small piece of that puzzle. So, you know, I think it's always worth keeping in mind that this data gathering exercise is not the answer. That being said, we have heard again and again from all of our affiliates that one of the biggest barriers that you face is the lack of good tools to really understand what workers are earning at the factory level. And as we've heard that feedback again and again, most recently in the Fair Compensation Survey that we put out there, we've really felt that it's our job at FLA to help overcome that barrier and to put together a tool that works. And I think we've done that, so we're extremely excited to have it out in the world and have you all using it. A couple key points. Many of you may already be familiar with the tool that's used during SCI assessments, which Jose will also show you in a bit. You are undoubtedly also aware that that tool is quite complicated and involves a lot of worker sampling. And again, the feedback that we've gotten from affiliates is that that tool was too complicated. It's too complicated, and while the information is really great and certainly very useful for FLA, is more than what is manageable for most factories, and was sort of overkill. So we've been working over the past year, both FLA staff and the practitioners working group, to develop a tool and a methodology that is simpler, yet still takes all aspects of wage into account. And by that, I mean we don't ever want to think of wages as just base pay, for example. We want to make sure that we are taking into account all of the other ways that workers earn: cash benefits, in-kind benefits, incentive pay, etc. So in finding that balance between getting a very complete look at wage and also making a simpler methodology, we've come up with the tool that you'll see today. And rather than requiring a full worker sample, which was proving to be quite complicated and time-consuming, what Jose will show you today is that the tool asks just for totals and then automatically generates an average worker pay out of those totals. And we think this is a really useful compromise, giving you all the data and the information that you need without making the methodology overly complicated. So what we want you to do after today, if you haven't already, and I should say we have many affiliates who are already using this tool. Some of you might be on the phone now. So what we want you to do after today, if you haven't already, is to choose a place to start. Choose some key countries or key product lines or strategic suppliers where you think that understanding wage levels and having good wage data and being able to compare those to benchmarks will be useful for you in your internal decision making. Choose a place to start. Communicate with suppliers or production facilities. Share this sheet with them, and we have some resources for you to help with that sharing. Ask them to enter the data, gather that data, and put it into the wage ladder generator. And what you'll get is you'll start to get a picture of what wages look like in those key areas and how they map out against benchmarks. So our goal at the end of today is to have you feel very empowered to be able to do those next steps. And towards that end, I will go ahead and pass it over to Jose to get into the nitty-gritty of the tools and resources we have for you.
Thanks, Renee. I'd like to begin by echoing Renee that, we put a lot of hard work into this, and we're very happy for it to be in your hands. And in that sense, really, the work is now on you all to go out into the world and make use of this tool. We think that it's exactly what you need and that it'll really enable you to make a change in the world. So to begin, I'd first like to direct you to the email that we originally sent on March 13th, 2017. It contains information on webinars that we use to introduce this tool, and it also contains 2 links to 2 Dropbox folders that include the tool itself. So that is a Dropbox folder titled Materials to Share with Your Suppliers and Your Production Facilities, and another folder titled Materials for Your Own Data Analysis. The reason why we split the 2 folders is that the first folder is really stuff that you should be sending out to your supply chain, and the second folder is one that you should make of use internally. We think that it's best that we separate the 2. Now, the first folder contains the wage data collection tool and an example tool filled out with fake data that should help you learn how to use the tool itself. And it's created in 3 versions, in Chinese, Spanish, and English. There's also an introduction letter that we've drafted, which you can use to introduce your supply chain to the tool itself, and it should serve as just a brief customizable letter that you can send to everybody in your network. The second folder contains the materials for your own data analysis, and that's what we call the Fair Compensation Dashboards. And we hope that you'll make use of this after you've collected your data to then find insights and to understand your data better. So today we're going to walk through the toolkit. And before we do that, we'll briefly show you the old toolkit so you have an understanding of what we improved. And then we hope that you would keep your questions until the end. And as always, you can always reach out to us. You can reach out to me directly at jperales@fairlabor.org if you have any questions in the future. And you could also reach out to the FLA in general at faircomp@fairlabor.org. So to begin, we would like to start by just briefly going through what our old methodology looked like. As you can see, we had an older Excel tool that, in addition to its difference in design, is fundamentally different in methodology. We asked for a set of workers sampled across a set of occupations and months, and the problem with this is that it's difficult, really, to get an accurate sample of workers. It takes a lot of time, and really there's too many lack of nuances in this version of the tool. It's hard to get estimates of monthly wages when your payroll cycle is on a biweekly basis. And so that's really what caused us to create this toolkit, that we realized we needed an easier method of collecting this data in a way that would standardize all of our information and really make ease of use for the tool a lot more improved. So to begin, if you actually go to the Dropbox sheet, the first link titled Materials for Your Suppliers and Facilities, you'll see folders with the Chinese, English, and Spanish tool, and then a Wage Data Collection Toolkit email template. Here's that introductory email template, and as you can see, it's simply a template for you to insert your factory supplier name, your company name, And then we ask that you include a due date and your own name and contact information. The due date is rather important because it'll make sure that your factories know that there's a concrete work plan in place and that this toolkit is meant to be conducted during that time. And of course, you can customize this however you'd like. Now, the first part that we'll dive into is our English example sheet of the tool itself. It's important to note that this entire Excel workbook has several tabs at the bottom. So in order to complete this toolkit, you have to manage through these different tabs. And the first one contains a set of instructions. So it'll elaborate exactly what this data collection tool is, and then it'll explain what information is needed. The first part is basic information about the factory, so the address, basic demographic information, and the second part is information about the 4 occupations. It's important to note that we ask for the top 4 occupations with the largest number of workers and that we exclude supervisors. It's important because we ask for an aggregate total, and if you include supervisors, it'll bias the total to show a higher wage, as supervisors tend to have a higher pay scale than line workers. So when you begin by choosing the occupations you want information on, you should begin really by figuring out which line workers are in 4 large categories and group them in that way. We then ask for payroll information from 3 pay periods within the past 12 months. So by pay period, we mean whichever payroll cycle your factory operates. So if your factory pays your workers on a daily or a biweekly, a monthly, or any type of basis, you should use that basis for which to enter data. And then we have a standardized methodology for which we take that pay period basis and then output a net wage on a monthly cycle. That way that we make sure that everything is done on a standardized basis and we make this data comparable across factories. So you should do this providing payroll information on a pay period basis for a peak season, an average season, and a low season. Once you go through that step, you'll be asked for a list of in-kind benefits and cash benefits that represents a total amount spent for the entire workforce in the past year. So now that we've gone through the basics of the instructions tab, the next step is to go into the dictionary tab. We thought that this would be helpful for those being first introduced to this tool to really set a framework for how we discuss the rest of the tool. The first is a list of items like pay periods, in-kind benefits, incentive pay, legal taxes and deductions, and then we go ahead and define that list. We then provide a set of examples, a non-exhaustive list, but a set of examples that we think will better inform your factories and production facilities. And then we also went ahead and included a list of non-examples. We hope that this will help clarify what we mean by pay period, occupation, in-kind benefits, cash benefits, incentive pay, and legal deductions and taxes. And then once you've read through the dictionary and you've better understood what foundational questions we'll be asking about, you then navigate to the next tab on factory information. So it'll ask for the name of the factory, the date of data entry based on the date, the month, and the year as drop-down lists, the name of the person responsible for data entry, and then the email address of the person responsible for data entry. We hope that once you collect this data, if you have any questions or points of clarification, you could use that email address to contact the person who entered the data directly, and that'll make sure that you can expedite any clarifications. The next information is about local information, so really it's the address of the factory. It's important here that you input the street address, city, but that you also choose a country based on this drop-down list. Later in our in this review, we'll explain why this is important, but suffice it to say, if you choose one of these country names, you'll be able to learn more about the wages of that country. So for the purposes of today, we'll be focusing on a factory in Washington, D.C. That is located in the United States. Now, if you're operating in a facility that is not in this list of countries, you simply choose other and write the country name below. But for today, we'll stick in the United States. You also should include the zip code and local currency under the local information. And then next, you'll be asked about demographic information. So this should include the total number of supervisors and non-supervisors in the factory. And it should also include the number of men and women in the factory. We'll collect this data to just provide information on demographics in the future. And then lastly, you'll be asked about the type of product and yearly production at the factory, and then the amount of rest days. Here we allow you to choose between 1 and 2 rest days, and this will be very important when we provide a net wage that is on a monthly basis, as we'll use this information to determine exactly how many days were worked in a month. After you successfully complete all this information on the Factory Information tab, you should direct your attention to the Occupations tab. Here, we first ask you to generally describe the wage structure of the factory. We hope to use this as reference if there's a point of clarification later in the payroll information. And then at this point, you'll have your factory select the occupations. You're allowed to choose up to 4 occupations, and you should name the occupation and then describe the work done by the occupation. It's important that when you choose an occupation, just to reiterate that you should not include any supervisors, any line managers, anybody who is different than the person directly working on the product. And it's also important to note that these workers should generally be paid the same, give or take some pay grade that should account for differences in experience or whatnot, but they should generally be paid, they should have access to the same kinds of bonuses, they should have access to the same opportunities to pay as a group. So that's how you should choose these occupational groups. Now after you've made your choice, you can go ahead and move to the Pay Period Peak tab. Now this is where the meat of the tool is. It'll ask for a lot of information, so it's important that it's done correctly. You should first read the instructions at the top, which asks you to choose a pay period from a peak production season, and that pay period should be from within the last 12 months. And if you happen to select a pay period that includes a major or multiple day holiday, we ask that you instead choose a different pay period. This is because when we give you a net compensation per month, if there's a pay period chosen for this payroll information that contains multiple holidays, then it'll skew the results, and we ask that you choose one without a holiday. Now, the first part of this includes information on the pay period itself. So you should begin by choosing the start date and the end date of the pay period, and then inserting the number of regular working days and the number of regular working hours. Again, this is very useful for our methodology of producing a monthly figure. You'll then be asked to input information on worker information, and as you can see, the choices of occupation actually appear so that it'll be easier for the people entering this information to enter the information in the right place. And they'll be asked to include the total amount of workers in the occupation, the total amount of women, and the total amount of men in the occupation. Next, we have a table for the amount of hours worked. Now, it's very important to note that when we ask for total regular hours, total overtime hours, and total leave hours worked, we're really asking for the amount of person hours worked in total by the occupation. So it's not just the average amount of hours worked by the workers, but instead it's all the hours worked by all of the workers. So as you can see in this example, we have 30 workers in the embroidery occupation, and they worked for around 80 hours, and so their total amount of hours worked is 2,400. Now, of course, if some workers are on leave, then you can change that formula by including the amount of leave hours, and that's how we collect that information. We then ask for information on hourly pay. So like the hour section, we ask that you include total amount spent on pay for all workers during that pay period. And you do this for the total amount of regular pay, which is all amount paid to workers for regular working hours. We ask that you do that for overtime pay, which is all paid outside of regular working hours. And then we ask you to include the total amount of leave pay. Next, we have a section on incentive pay. So incentive pay is a form of pay that includes any earnings that vary each pay period according to a worker or team's productivity. And like the previous sections, it's divided by occupation, and we provide 5 allowances for incentive pay. So you can enumerate up to 5 forms of incentive pay, and we ask that you first name the form of incentive pay, that you describe that incentive pay for future reference, and that you include the total amount of incentive pay earned by the entire group of workers in an occupation. Now, this part here can be quite tricky, but we hope that we've provided examples and we've included the proper instructions to explain it. We ask that you indicate whether or not this pay was earned during overtime or not. So if, for example, workers are paid a bonus based on meeting a production quota, if that quota bonus included work that occurred during overtime hours, you would include yes. However, in this example, if there's an attendance bonus where they're given a bonus if they worked all regular hours in a pay period, then you would include no. This is important because we use this information, whether or not an incentive payment was made during overtime work or not, to determine if that incentive pay is included. After this section, you'll see a section on legal deductions and taxes. Just like incentive pay, you're allowed to enumerate up to 5 forms of taxes and deductions. And just like incentive pay, you should name the tax and deduction, describe that tax, and then list the entire amount paid for all workers in an occupation. Now, it's important that you can leave blank taxes or blank spaces for incentives. You don't have to list 5, but you can list up to 5. Now, once you finish one payroll cycle for a pay period tab, you should then move on to the next pay period tab, which will be exactly the same, except it'll ask for this information for a regular pay period. So you'll go ahead and insert the pay period information at the beginning, including the dates and the hours and days worked. You'll include the worker information for all the occupations. You'll include all the hour information, the information on hours worked for all the occupations. You'll include the pay, the incentive pay, and the legal deductions and taxes, just like you did for the peak cycle. And after this tab, you'll do the same for the low production season. And by giving this information on peak, regular, and low production season, we're then able to give you a seasonally adjusted figure for net compensation. And once you finish this set of information on the payroll, you should navigate towards the in-kind benefits tab at the bottom. Now, it's important to note that unlike the payroll information that we ask, the in-kind benefit information is asked on an annual basis, and it's asked for the entire workforce. That's a big change from asking on a pay period basis for a particular occupation, and we want to make sure that that change is noted between the sheets. So if in this situation you're listing a form of medical insurance, that medical insurance should be available to all workers in the workforce, and it should be listed on an annual basis. Now, it's important that we define correctly a form of in-kind benefits, and the form that we at the FLA use is, the definition for in-kind benefits is that it's a good or service provided regularly to workers. And it's important to note that these goods or services can be free or sometimes partially free to workers. Now, if the service isn't entirely free, you should only include the total amount that was provided to workers that covers that partial payment. So, as an example, let's say your entire workforce gets $50 that covers $100 of medical insurance. So the worker contributes $50 for the medical insurance a month, and the employer contributes another $50. Then, in aggregate, you would only include the $50 that the employer provided for, and not the total $100 of the medical insurance, because the employer is only providing that partial amount. So once you list off up to 5 forms of in-kind benefits, and it's important to note that you don't have to include all 5, but you can enumerate up to 5. Once you have all of that information listed, you then move on to the next tab on cash benefits. So unlike in-kind benefits, cash benefits are a form of pay given to all workers regardless of performance. So in this example, all workers are given a transportation subsidy and a year-end bonus. And just like in-kind benefits, it's listed for everybody in the workforce, and you're supposed to list information for the entire year. And just like in-kind benefits, you can list up to 5. So now that you've inputted all this information, you should move to the Summary tab, where you can see our calculations for net compensation per month per worker, and we list it in the peak, regular, low, and seasonally adjusted seasons for all 4 occupations. Now, we consider this to be somewhat of a check on the validity of the data. So if, for example, you see that one occupation is making considerably less than the others, for example, everyone here is making around $3,000. If someone was making $500 a month, that should be cause for concern that some information was entered incorrectly. Or let's just say this chart isn't displaying any information at all. That should be another cause for concern that there was information entered incorrectly. However, we realize that this small overview of the information isn't enough for your analysis, and that you'll need some more information to make impactful decisions in your supply chain. So the last tab is actually a way for you to transfer information from this tool sheet, this tool Excel workbook, into another workbook that we call the Fair Compensation Dashboards workbook. Now, there's a set of instructions on how to do this, but it's actually pretty simple. All you have to do is go to this yellow cell at the end of this workbook. You should copy it using Control-C, and then you should navigate from that workbook and then open up the Fair Compensation Dashboards workbook. Now, the first sheet on the Fair Compensation Dashboard simply explains how to use the dashboard, how to copy and paste the data from the previous tool, and then it goes through and describes all of the information that you'll be able to navigate. So the second sheet is actually a corresponding sheet that asks you to paste the information. Now, if you go ahead and you paste the information regularly, it'll actually cause errors into the workbook. And to identify that, we've colored the information as red. But if instead you go ahead and use a paste special values of your information, which I'll have to actually recopy quickly. So if you're on the dashboards and you paste special values, which you can do by going to values here, then you'll notice that the color turns green, which means that everything is all right, and then you can proceed to go through your data. So first, you can see the list of factor information. It's all neatly organized here. You can examine the worker information, and then you could look at the pay period information. It's really important that you understand which kind of pay period your factory or facility used, and it's important that these pieces of information line up. So if, for example, there was a start date and end date that didn't include 10 working days or 80 working hours, then the information that we'll be calculating will be calculated incorrectly. So this is really a key point of this of this exercise where you can start to check your data and make sure that it was entered correctly by your facility. But once you've looked through this information, you can see our first chart, which is a wage breakdown. It's the regular pay, in-kind benefits, cash benefits, and minus taxes and legal deductions to make a net computation. And you can see that for the factory average here, and then you can see that average for the occupational average. At the top left, you can navigate a drop-down list to choose the production season. So by default, it's on seasonal average, but if you wanted to, you could see the peak, the regular, and low seasons if you're interested. And once you look through this tab, you can navigate to something we're all very excited to show, which is our interactive wage ladder. So we realized that it's not enough to collect your wage data across your supply chain, but that you really need some benchmarks to compare it to. So we've done a lot of research on 11 countries to provide 6 benchmarks for each of those countries, and those benchmarks vary from poverty lines and legal minimum wages to average industrial wages and living wage estimates. So in order to navigate this, like the previous chart, you can choose the production season, but if it's a country that's large enough, like the United States, you can actually go through a drop-down list of regions, because we realize that wages in Indiana are different from wages in Pennsylvania, and they're even more different from wages in Massachusetts. So by going through this regional drop-down list, you can actually account for those regional variations in wages in a country. Now, once you've gone through and you realize that you're above or below certain thresholds, you're probably going to wonder how we got to those threshold numbers. And that's where you will go into the next sheet, which is a benchmark information sheet. So we provide the name of the benchmark, the methodology behind the benchmark, some calculation notes so that you can arrive at the same figures we do, and then a source so that you can go ahead and maybe do some research of your own. And then lastly, we provide the monthly value in local currency. So as you can see, we have the World Bank International Poverty Line here. We include other benchmarks like the legal minimum wage, the national poverty threshold, the average wage for textile and apparel and furnishing workers, the worker wage demand, and then a living wage estimate. And we'll provide this for up to 11 countries. In our first iteration of this tool, we have done enough research to provide wages for the countries which are listed in the tool under factory information. So when I noted here that it's important you choose the right drop-down list, it's because this list of countries will actually determine what wage ladder you see. So if here your tool is entered for Mexico, in the dashboard you'll see wage benchmarks specifically for Mexico. Back to the dashboards workbook. Once you have looked through your benchmark information and you now have a better understanding of how we got to those benchmarks, you can look into some other information we've created. Here is a breakdown of worker demographics. It's just a few pie charts for each occupation on the gender breakdown, and you can also examine this information by filtering on production season or just keep it on a seasonal average. Now, because we've made a change in methodology from a worker sample to a occupational pay period sample, it's not possible to get an actual gender wage gap, but it is possible to see if there are disparities in the jobs that people have and the pay that those jobs offer. So you can see that in sewing and in quality assurance and cutting, there is a gender skew, and that in embroidery, there's an opposite gender skew. So if there were disparities between those occupations, if let's just say embroidery made more than all 3 of the other occupations, then you'll know that there's at least a stepping stone for you to investigate a gender wage gap and for you to do some more insightful analysis. Now, the last section includes a section on other pay. So because we collected information on leave pay, incentive pay, and overtime pay, we thought that it would be best to include that information here. And like the previous sections, you can filter the production season, and it shows you an average on factory wages, either on a factory basis or an occupational basis. And we offer a disclaimer that we at the FLA don't consider income made outside of regular working hours to be included in our net wage calculation, because we strongly believe that workers should earn a fair wage on a regular working schedule. But we also recognize that our affiliates are taking the time to collect all this data, and that they should be able to examine this data how they see fit. So we've included it for your further insight. Now, we hope that this is all a stepping stone for you to better understand fair compensation in your supply chain. And we hope that you can use the fair compensation dashboard along with the tool to really be the first step in how you engage your supply chain on fair compensation. And with that, I'd like to hand it off to Renee just to give some more strategic insights on using this toolkit, and then afterwards we can dive into some questions and answers.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jose. That was a huge amount of information, and I was sitting here getting increasingly excited, especially when we got to the wage dashboard, because, you know, again, we really hope that this will be data that you can use. And one final point around that, of course, in the past, FLA has and actually will continue to gather wage data in our SCI assessments. That wage data is still going to be used internally for our own data analysis and for public reporting. However, the data that you gather using this new tool is for you. It's not for FLA, although certainly down the road our plan is to have a centralized database where all of this data can sit so that you can more easily compare the performance in your supply chain against aggregate data. But again, that's for you. And so this data is, I want to emphasize that point because we've gotten questions around confidentiality, et cetera. And our expectation is that this data is for your purposes. It will not be used except for possibly in the very highest level of aggregate for FLA reporting purposes. I would love to open it up for some questions, and we ask that you type your questions into the Q&A box that you see on your screen.
Yeah, there's two options here. You can type your question directly into the Q&A, or you can press the little raise your hand button in your control panel, and that will pop up and I can unmute you.
Oh, great. And I would encourage you to feel free to ask questions either, specifically about the tool, the definitions in the tool, the information that the tool is asking for, or also if you have questions about sort of strategy for implementing this tool. I know that we have some folks on the phone who have used this tool already, so perhaps they could chime in with their experiences as well.
All right, we have Nathan from Outer Stuff. Let's see. Sorry, working on unmuting you, Nathan.
And I'll say while Kathy's working on that, Nathan is an affiliate who has used this tool already, so really happy to hear from you, Nathan.
Sorry there, Nathan. I'm struggling. We're having a problem with the technical difficulty with the unmuting. Let's see. For right now, while I work on Nathan's, I'm going to move it over to Luis, who has his hand raised, and I'm unmuting you now, Luis.
Hello?
Yep,
Hi.
I can hear you.
Hi. Hi. Pleased to meet you. I've worked with the toolkit before, with the previous one. With the dashboard information, normally we have production a lot in Central America, and we only see like from Mexico benchmark in this case, or information. When you input the information from, let's say, Honduras or Nicaragua, it's not going to give you any information when you see the dashboard. Is that correct? Or it's just some other information that is not specific from those countries?
So as of now, we don't have an updated list of benchmarks for those countries that you suggested. We do have information on El Salvador, so we hope that that will help people who have facilities there. However, we realize that there's right now a gap of information, and that in the future we hope to fill that gap. It'll involve spending more time researching new benchmarks and updating the ones that we have currently researched, but believe me, we do plan to fill that gap, and we know that it's important that you have this information, and I think without setting a specific timeline, at least sometime within the next year, we'll definitely roll out some more information for everyone.
And thanks, Jose. I'll just chime in there as well and say that for resource purposes, we had to make some decisions there, and we've chosen the 11 countries that amongst our affiliates represent the highest number of sourcing facilities. So that was the way that decision was made, but we do understand there's some gaps.
Okay, perfect.
All right, thank you, Luis. We are going to move to Anna next from PVH. Let's see. Oh, sorry about that. For some reason, a few of you I'm not able to unmute you. Well, in the meantime, we've gotten Nathan's question, Nathan from Outer Stuff. Will the FLA offer information by country from all affiliates without saying affiliate and factory names so that we can have all country data?
Yeah, Nathan, thanks. That's a good question. So the next step for FLA is to create, as I said, a central database where you will be able to upload your wage information, get some of the visualizations that you've seen already without copying and pasting, and that central warehouse will allow us to automatically aggregate the data so that then you could compare not just to the wage benchmarks, but also to the actual prevailing wage that we see amongst FLA affiliates as a whole. So that's definitely in the works, and that is part of our goal for this exercise, is that we will be able to then provide you with really, really good prevailing wage information.
All right, thank you. Anna, I'm going to actually try unmuting Amy, one of your coworkers who's also on the line, because I'm able to do that. So hopefully we will hear you through Amy's line. Are you there,
yes.
Anna?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we can.
Perfect. I apologize about that. We're using the conference phone. We just had a question about the analysis tool. Can you confirm that the guidance is to not share that with suppliers, and if so, the rationale behind that guidance?
So the idea is that because we are really, in essence, conducting a survey, we'd rather not the results of that analysis affect the survey responses. It's really a methodological decision. Especially if people are sending this to factories without a lot of guidance, maybe they might be scared at seeing an analysis that, you know, they're not meeting the highest living wage benchmark, or if they're comparing any information, that might lead them to go back and change results. So we made that decision as a methodological choice, that we don't want the results of the survey to impact the actual responses to the survey.
That being said, a really important clarification there, this is Renee. We recommend that you use this data collection exercise as a jumping off point for a very transparent conversation with suppliers and production facilities. So our recommendation specifically is that in order not to skew the data, it's best not to share the dashboard along with the data gathering tool. But methodologically, if you would like to share the data gathering tool, gather that information, analyze it, and then share the analysis with your factories and suppliers as part of a conversation about how you view that analysis, how you view the benchmarks, and the context in which you will work with your suppliers to address the issue, then that would be ideal. So we're definitely not suggesting a lack of transparency. We're just suggesting methodologically, in order to get the best data, it's probably best to share the tool first and then the analysis afterwards. It also has the added benefit of allowing you to really have a conversation and emphasize to suppliers and production facilities that it's not necessarily an accountability exercise as much as it is a problem-solving exercise in which you're looking at the data together and determining next steps.
That's a great answer, thank you. And I mean, maybe not right at this call, but it would be great to learn at the next calls to hear from other brands that have used this as a jumping off point and to learn from their experience with that.
Absolutely, and one of our goals as more and more of our affiliates use this tool is to convene exactly those types of conversations, either in the form of additional webinars, potentially as a roundtable at a board meeting, et cetera, because we think that kind of information sharing could really bring us as a community quite a long way in starting to address compensation issues.
And Renee, just one additional question, if you don't mind. So earlier you mentioned that the 11 countries were selected based upon the representation from some of the suppliers and brands that you are working with. Will you, moving forward as the benchmarks are being updated, have a regular cadence for releasing updated tools, or will this be kind of on an ad hoc basis depending on when new information is integrated?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think it may end up being a bit of both, and the reason I say that is because there are certain instances in which an ad hoc basis will be necessary. You know, we think of examples like El Salvador, where there was a significant minimum wage increase. In those cases, we might need to take it on an ad hoc basis, but ideally what we'll be able to do is to do, you know, a more standardized, say, annual update, so that you're not, we don't want to be sending out, you know, updates that you have to keep track of, and that will, you know, mean many different versions of the tool and the dashboard floating out in the world. So we'll keep it as regular as we can.
Thank you.
One piece of information on the updating of benchmarks that I'd like to clarify is that you know, it's really part of the benefit of separating the tool from the dashboard, in that we can continue to use this same tool while regularly updating the dashboard without having to deal with issues with, you know, different versions of the tool in the world. The same data collection and the same methodology will exist in your supply chain even if we change the dashboard, and we hope that that decision will make it easier to update those changes. And so you don't have to worry about, oh, which version of the tool did I send to which factories and which ones are updated and which ones aren't. Really, because the dashboard is a standalone piece of analytics, it'll allow you to deal with changes in analysis rather than worrying about changes in the methodology of the tool. So hopefully that will prove beneficial to everyone. But if there are no other questions, I think that we can end by thanking you all for your time and for your commitment to fair compensation. Like I said at the beginning, we worked really hard on this, and we're excited to send it out into the world. And really, we're excited to see what you all do with this tool, and hopefully to create some change in the world.
Thank you all, and have a wonderful afternoon and or morning and or evening wherever you might be in the world.